All right, we're here with Alan Skillicorn of the Illinois 66th, talking about the race. He's facing Carolyn Schofield in the primary coming up on March 17th.
That's right. Thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely.
You're a member of the Republican caucus.
Yes.
And why do you think that voters should return you to Springfield?
Well, there's no question that I have been someone that has been a thorn in Mike Madigan's side, pushing the Republican issues. And give you an example, there's two things that I'm very, very proud of. And one is that in 2017, I was the only person in the Illinois House to submit a balanced budget. And it was a balanced budget that did not require a tax hike. It was a reform-only budget and would have been able to negate that $32 billion tax hike that we had. So that is not insignificant. But then also, I'm someone that's been very much a leader on pension reform. 2 years ago, I started talking about the need to change our Constitution to open up pensions. No one else would take, because it's a scary thing to talk about, because special interests, the unions will attack you for it, and they're all afraid of that. Now there's other people publicly talking about it, and I, maybe it wasn't me, maybe it was just a coincidence, but I don't think it's a coincidence. The fact is that I've been talking about it for 2 years, and now our minority leader says in caucus that he's for this. Now, I don't know if he'll say it in public. I don't know if he'll be writing an editorial on it, but in caucus with other 43 other Republicans, he says we need to do it. That is something where I've been able to change the Overton window on that, and that's why this summer I came out with my own pension reform package, which would actually get us to the fact it would save our pensions in a decade.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about pensions, since and it's a natural segue there, and obviously it's probably the biggest single problem that our state faces financially. There is what I had gathered from some of what you'd called for was I think most of it would require a constitutional amendment, right?
There's a couple things that do, a couple things that don't. So when I put my budget together, and actually, just so people know, I'm doing my 17 budget over again, and I'm basically adjusting what needs to happen for 2020, because some things are better. So, we did raise taxes. There's a lot more money coming in, but the economy is booming. So there is more revenue coming into the state, but there's also challenges that we need to address too. So I'm adjusting my debt budget to make it work for 2020. But on the pension side of it, there are some things we can do that alleviate a constitutional amendment, which we could do today.
Like
and there's some things. Well, yeah, my tier 3 would require a constitutional amendment, but that's actually the one that we could opt out of. And if we have hours, we could probably talk about the specifics on that one. But my big 3 reforms would require a constitutional amendment. That is to cap the pensions, to adjust the COLA, and actually, realistically, people are living longer. We should raise the retirement 1 year. These are modest reforms, but these are modest reforms that save the system and get us back into the black in a decade. And otherwise, we're going to be threatening retirement. These people depend on this money. If we let it collapse, what happens? If we let it go farther, what happens to our home values? These are serious questions, and we need to address it. And even though these aren't going to be popular solutions, the fact that I'm put it out there and actually put pen to paper, we can talk about it.
Where do you propose capping? Do you propose a lifetime payout cap, an annual?
So what I did is annual. Okay. So I use the same number that the federal government uses for Social Security max contribution. Mm-hmm. So if you have your own business, your max contribution today is $137,000 a year, and then it goes up with CPI every year, right? Okay. I think that is enough money for a max pension contribution. And it does go up with CPI every year. And realistically, the most people that are collecting pensions, so there's people probably watching this right now that might be getting $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year. They're not going to be threatened by this at all, okay? But it's the people who have 2, 3 pensions that are double and triple dipping that are the big abusers of the system. And give you an idea, there's about 9,000 people in the state of Illinois this would affect. So that one reform would actually pick up quite a bit of money.
How much? What sort of estimate?
Well, it's over time, but to be honest, the big money is the COLA. Mm-hmm. That COLA at 3% compounding is a lot more expensive than the cap. So this is a small one, but that's more like a parity, because how can you not? Governor Jim Edgar is bringing $170,000 a year in pension, right? And he's a young man. Former Governor Edgar. We're working hard to support what he did years ago. And he's been out of office for a long time already. So That's not right.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense. What is your position when it comes to the we're going to have obviously this big referendum vote in November on the graduated income tax increase. I'm assuming you're against it.
I am against it,
yes.
And I'll tell you exactly why.
Please do.
So many states that have moved that direction are trying to undo the graduated tax. So the last state to adopt it was Connecticut. They're trying to undo it right now, and if you look at Connecticut taxes, they are out of control. And it makes it easier to raise taxes on everybody. If you say, oh, it's only going to affect the rich, well, what happens when they move not the rate, but the bracket down? And they're going to move the bracket down to get us. And frankly, the 66th district will pay out, I think like $900,000 more under the governor's proposed rates. So that's $900,000 that comes out of Kane and McHenry counties, their local economies. That is money that my constituents can use to spend money on vacations, cars, television sets, clothes for kids. That is not insignificant. And that's it. We can go on to it more, but our past actions prove to me that there is no need to increase revenue, because all we do when we increase revenue, and this is a tax hike, don't get me wrong, it's a tax hike. All we do is squander the extra revenue. What we really need is bold transformative reforms.
So if you were going to, the difficulty I think with a pension constitutional amendment, you got to get 60% of people to go for it, and there's a lot of ways to attack it.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, quite simply, you are trying to reduce the retirement income of seniors who, a lot.
But
of
only a small percentage. Sure, but
sure.
Yeah.
But you know how your opponents would cast it. Do you think that's the kind of initiative that could have a chance?
Well, I'm going to use Governor Pritzker's words, and he said, "Give the people the opportunity to vote on it." That's all we can expect. And if people don't want it, then they're going to have to deal with the fact that their property values are not going to ever recover. They're going to have to deal with the fact that their property tax payments are going to be more than their mortgages. And those bills are not going to be stagnant. Those bills are going to go up and up and up, and they're never going to go down unless we do something about this.
What are the options for such an amendment?
The wording, or how we do it, or the Constitutional Convention? Okay.
Yeah.
So, it could be done by just voter initiative, by ballot. Okay, but obviously the Supreme Court has thrown a couple of those out already, so I would be a little bit wary of that, or a legislature. So I have filed, my own constitutional amendment to do that. There's a couple other Republicans in the last couple of years that have done so also. So it's not, foreign, but there is going to be need to do it. And again, this is one of those situations where we still need to move that Overton window of it being a normal. So Arizona's done this. Rhode Island has done this, and they fix these things. And so it can be done, and I don't want to be defeatist about this.
Sure. Well, how do you, as a member of the minority party, actually affect that change, though? How can you do that? You're not friend of the speaker. I'm not saying anything out of turn.
Well, I don't think he's going to be speaker much longer.
Yeah.
I don't see how he recovers. But, if we aren't talking truth to power, we're never going to move that ball forward. And yes, we need to get a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans together to do this. But if we don't start talking about it, it's never going to happen. And these are big changes. I doubt that Arizona and Rhode Island did this overnight. So it takes time to change minds. And frankly, if there is a groundswell of people that want to get this done, and if there's people who can't afford to pay their property taxes, that's going to lead to it. Some of those roadblocks are going to go away. Speaker Madigan's not going to be there forever, and frankly, I would be shocked if he's speaker again after this term. I don't see how you have that Mike McLean and him covering up the rape allegation. How could he survive that? And I don't see how a majority of Democrats could elect him as speaker again. So let's look at him as just, he's someone that's going to go away to dustbin. So we got to start working on the next person.
Is that kind of how you see your role, as more of a grassroots type of?
Once upon a time, my wife told me that when I ran for village trustee, that maybe I could do more as an activist than inside, and she wasn't wrong. But there are thousands of people that want to see change and don't get it, and that's why our country is going through this right now. Was President Trump elected by a bunch of establishment people? No, he was elected by people who normally stay home and people who don't pick up phones when they poll their houses. and that is happening all across our country, and people are upset at the system. Well, let's focus that energy on something positive.
Well, if we want to talk about something positive, let's talk about reducing property tax. What do you propose or prescribe for the state of Illinois to do that sensibly?
So we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. Let's do what Indiana did. And what Indiana does is they cap property taxes for residential properties at 1%. So they call it like basically 1, 2, 3. 1% for
actual value rather than
actual value, yes.
So what you could actually sell the home for.
Correct. And theoretically, our homes are valued that way, but there's this formula and multipliers. I know if I look at my house, because it's supposed to be 33% of assessed value is what we pay property tax. Now, isn't it ironic that Cook County is 25% and the rest of the state is 33%? Well, you got to fix that. There has to be parity between the two. But if you theoretically, if you do the math on your property tax bill, that you multiply that number by 3, you should come up with your fair price. And if I look at my most recent bill, it's probably pretty close. But why goof around with this 33% garbage and then Cook County's 25%? Just make it straight value at 1%. That's what Indiana does. We might have to change our school funding formula, but again, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Michigan did that just a few years ago. They did schools just like we did. 20% funding from the states, 80% from local taxpayers, and they flipped it in 1 year. In 1 year, they fixed it, and it changed things dramatically. And imagine what that would do to blighted areas. You've got southern Cook County where you would be silly to put a warehouse, a big property there, right? Because the property tax bill is going to be a couple $100,000 a year. Yet you have access to transportation, you have people that in the workforce that would like to work. Instead, you go to Indiana. Those are problems we can solve.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, I think about my own home. It's probably worth, I don't know, maybe $275,000, $280,000, and I have about a $9,000 tax bill. And these are ballpark things, so don't yell at me, folks at home. But so if we were to cap
yours is probably
1%,
pretty common though. I think most of you are well in McHenry County it's more 2.5 to there's some areas in Woodstock that are like closer to 6. But yours is super common.
You're in special service areas and things like that. But okay, so if you took my say a $270,000 house and you cap the amount that I would pay in property tax at 1%, I'm a journalist, I'm not great at math, but I think we're talking about $2,700.
Yes.
That's for everybody. That's for all of the multiple governments that provide these services. That leaves a pretty big hole to fill.
But what's that biggest hole go to?
Well, my local school.
Well, specifically pensions.
Sure.
So 60% of every new property tax dollar in the past decade that we pay, pensions, legacy costs. That's something we can fix. So, and if we fix it, it opens up the door to other ways to finance it. If we have a rock solid way of fixing this, we can bond some of that debt. We don't do it until it's fixed, though. We do not go deeper into debt, something like that, but we have to fix the problem, and then we can adjust this.
Let's talk about what's going on in Springfield now, specifically when it involves ethics, and we've seen again we've got former senators being pleading guilty to taking bribes. We have this business with the search warrant involving the county board chairman here in McHenry County. Representative McSweeney says that he's raising the alarm that the Inspector General for the legislature has not been allowed to release findings of wrongdoing by current and former legislators. What needs to be done in Springfield to address some of the problems of corruption and official misconduct? How can you help us solve this problem in Illinois? Because we're getting tired of it.
So I can think of 3 specific solutions, and there's also ones those 3 I'm working on. First off, let's look at where ethics have been a problem but have been addressed. So everybody realizes the state of Louisiana was horribly corrupt a few years ago, right? And they have made real big strides to fixing that problem. Now, part of that is that Bobby Jindal became governor, and he really put the screws to the legislature to fix some of their ethics laws there. But they did it. So I have a copy. I should have brought it with me today. I've got a copy of that printed out at home, their ethics bill right there, that passed and has made big strides. But even locally, in Chicago, okay? So when Mayor Lightfoot came in, she came in and wanted an ethics package. So she really dictated what aldermen could do with second jobs. She put down the law on being able to disclose being lobbyists there, and these are significant things that the state doesn't have. So I look at, if Louisiana can do it and the city of Chicago can do it, why can't Springfield do the same thing? Those are real, and those are on paper. And don't forget, Mayor Lightfoot is a Democrat, Bobby Jindal is a Republican. These are bipartisan solutions, and these are not bipartisan hindrances there, and that can really happen. And then now the governor's addressed my third, and this is one that, frankly, I think I delivered a speech and he was listening, and he absolutely delivered on this. So back in November, this is paint the picture here. Leo Arroyo, Representative Arroyo, was just arrested for offering bribes to a state senator. They had a wire on him. I mean, the other person had a wire on him, and he's dead to rights on the charges. Okay, so this just happened, and so of course ethics was a big thing in November, and then the night before our last day of veto session, so it was like 11 o'clock at night. There's a new ethics bill that was posted by Minority Leader Harris, and it wasn't, a lot of it was window dressing, but there was one thing that was actually really strong on it, and there's an economic disclosure statement that we have to fill out as legislators and all elected officials across the state, but it's a little weak and vague. Okay, now if you lie on it, it's a pretty serious situation, but it's still really vague. You don't have to list where the income comes from. You don't have to disclose yourself as a lobbyist and other things. Well, the one that he proposed, you had to disclose, if you were a lobbyist, you had to disclose where money was coming from and all these other additional steps that are not there now. So what happened is that morning we met as a chamber, and there was like a little bit of action, and then we caucused. Both sides caucused, right? That bill was amended, and they took out that economic disclosure statement out of there. And it was a good bill. And on the debate floor, I told Minority Leader Harris that this was a good idea and I would have supported him. But because he took that out, I symbolically voted no because it was a good bill, and he just neutered it basically. So afterwards, I took his exact language and I filed that bill. So sure enough, 2 weeks ago, Governor Pritzker comes out and says that we should ban legislators from being lobbyists, and we have to disclose this information. He said, it's funny because in his speech, he said, like the carnival barkers and stuff like that. And then he said this, and I'm like, well, he just called me a carnival barker, but that's fine. Because he was listening, and someone had to say it, and a lot of legislators don't have the courage to say it.
So how would you evaluate it was probably one of the more active sessions that I've seen last spring.
It was productive, to say the least.
Yeah. What do you think as a member, you remember the House chamber, what do you think in terms of the work that got done for Illinois that passed in that session?
Well, I think some of the things that got done, it was productive, but not in the right direction. Yeah. So, there were lots of tax and fee increases, additional burdens for employers. I see ourselves trying to undo and counter the good things happening in Washington, D.C. And it's almost like the majority party here in Illinois wants us to lag the nation. And that's what I saw. And then the year didn't start out that way, though. The year actually started with people that were willing to compromise and get things done. There are a couple of my bills that would have helped property taxes locally. And I look at them as some of them would be a little bit unpopular to certain special interests. But I think the governor told a couple committee chairs, like, if you can find revenue in certain areas, go ahead and do it. Okay, so there was this openness. And even though these would have affected local governors, not the state, there was an openness for do like a minor tweak. And some of these were minor tweaks that I could live with, right? Maybe it wasn't as perfect as I had envisioned, but it was something I could have lived with. And I had committee chairs coming to me and saying, yeah, we can do this and we can go for it. Because typically most things are decided before they get the committee if they're going to be allowed to vote yes or no on them. So sometimes we'll have a hearing, but there's no vote allowed, right? If there's a vote allowed, typically the speaker's staff has said this is something that's okay to pass. It's very rarely does something go down in committee if it wasn't designed, or if it wasn't done to humiliate somebody, right? So these are situations where we would debate some bills, but then the governor's agenda took over and no one had time for anything. Give you an idea, I had a bill in Labor Committee and, I was told that we were going to pass it out of committee, and then all of a sudden, all these other bills came in from the governor, and we had no time for anything. And then of course deadlines come, and then for the last month of May, that's what we were doing and they were much more partisan than the session started. And up until the last 2 weeks of session, I was almost thinking it was kind of productive. I mean, there was a few things I was able to stop. Like there's, a couple taxes that were sitting in the Senate. And, if I see a Senate hearing on a tax hike, what I usually do is become a House sponsor. I probably shouldn't say this on the camera because our people know my strategy now. But like the bag tax, I saw it come up, be posted for a hearing. I'm like, well, I'll file to be the chief sponsor in the House, and then I'm not going to move it. Okay. I did that with the gas tax before, the first time the gas tax came around, and same thing. You pass the Senate and then it's dead in the House because I'm the sponsor. Now they can take the bill from me, but I'll squawk about it. So it was they didn't want to do that. And they're very vocal about them being mad at me doing that, but I read the rules and I'm in a minority party. I'm not going to be able to get all my agenda done. So what I do is I read the rules and I try to play chess.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's the strategy for getting something done, say, on the issue of property taxes? I mean, if there was one thing that we could change in the state that would probably make people feel a little bit better about living here and not moving to other states, it'd be property taxes.
It's a biggie. So, yeah, absolutely. And there are Democrats that want to work on this issue. There are. The person who's the chairman of the property tax task force, he's actually one of my better friends in Springfield. He wants to lower property taxes for his constituents because that's what they complain about the most, okay? But when they create a task force with 88 members and it still hasn't reported its findings and and basically they don't consider it a minority party, that's not serious. Now, granted, that's leadership that made that happen, but there are individual Democrats and there are some Republicans on the wrong side of this issue too. I will definitely tell the truth about other Republicans. I mean, that partisanness doesn't need to be there. I mean, we're either going to reform things or not. And people in both parties stand in the way. But there are people who want to move forward on this. Are there 60? Because we need 60 to pass the bill. I don't know about that. But there are both Republicans and Democrats that will address this issue. But it's leadership that gets in the way right now. I mean, a task force with 88 members, you're not going to have serious results out of that because it's just going to be people grandstanding for the camera.
On the topic of property taxes, I think, there was a proposal just this week about township consolidation, and that wants to take it statewide rather than just an option here in McHenry County. Where do you fall on township consolidation or other opportunities to consolidate?
People should be able to vote on it. Threshold used to be 10% of registered voters. That's thousands of signatures. That's very hard for a group of 3 or 4 people to do. They lowered it down to 3%. So it's a lot of work, but you could go and stand in front of the library for a month. You could go to a couple parades. You could do a couple things and you could get 3%. But 10% is you would have to hire people to go out and get signatures, and grassroots organizations not going to be able to do that. And so that's a good thing, and people should be able to vote on this. It is, it's a nuanced thing. Some rural areas really need townships, and rural areas it might be less expensive. But there's no reason why, incorporated areas, really need it that much. I mean, Algonquin Township is mostly incorporated. And Algonquin Township is the poster child for consolidation. That's something we need to move forward on.
Gotcha. One of the things that, obviously we had your opponent in, and she had mentioned the complaint that she herself filed against you about being at milk days and while it was in session, and that someone worked. This is what she alleges anyway, that someone was working your voting switch while you were at the milk days parade.
Yep.
How do you respond to that?
Well, I mean, you also got to realize that May 31st is the end of session. So that's when the Constitution requires a budget be passed and things like that. June 1st was a special day, basically, and this was something that was planned a month in advance, right? I had constituents that are up there, and I represent both McHenry and King counties. And I make a real point to serve both of those counties and kind of go above and beyond. That morning, Saturday the 1st, I went up to the Harvard. Now, I did every effort to leave early, and here is one thing that the rules don't address. The Illinois Chamber rules let staff and other legislators mark you as present, okay? So during the beginning part of the session, I think there were like 20 voice votes that are unanimous consent, and we all know that. We see it, like, hearing ayes. The ayes have it, right? Yeah. So it gets marked down as unanimous. So there's a bunch of those votes that I was marked off as unanimous with the rest of the crowd, right? I have actually written a letter to the House Clerk correcting that. I took no per diem that day, but the fact is, the afternoon when we debated real bills, I was there. I spoke out on these bills and really went after that tax hike, in my floor speech.
Another item that she raised was your support for legalized use of cannabis in the state. You do have a bit of a libertarian streak too.
Yes,
I think it's fair to say. And I think we actually we might have had an exchange about it on Twitter, where you had kind of cast it as an idea of personal freedom or personal liberty. Is that where your support for that came from?
It is a personal liberty issue, but also, is it good policy to lock people up in cages for smoking a plant? I don't think so. This isn't a hard drug. And frankly, I would wonder if my opponent is so concerned about this, the fact that she took over $50,000 from a marijuana lobbyist and then didn't show up for the meeting where McHenry County voted on it, I think speaks a lot, speaks volumes.
You are pretty active on social media, and I'd say it's pretty clear where you stand on all the things. You're an enthusiastic supporter of the president. You're enthusiastically pro-life. You're enthusiastically pro-Second Amendment. You also have something of a flair for taking on kind of controversial topics. Transgender student athletes, that sort of thing. What kind of feedback do you get from people about your use of social media? Does anybody criticize you ever for being too controversial on social media?
There's pros and cons. Yeah. I do admit I curate, I think a successful page.
Why do you choose to use it as you do?
I'm more of an activist. So these are things that, I'm interested and passionate about. And I think there's too many politicians that want to stay safe. They're afraid to speak their minds. And I don't think people should be surprised when a vote comes down a certain way. There is a congressman that would explain every single vote he took. Now, we vote on like 3,000 things. So just do the math. I can't do 100 a day, right? But I kind of like to be a little bit like that. And so many people don't know what inside baseball is really like that I like to be able to share it. And also part of it is that I went down to Springfield and I knew what the partisanship was going to be like, and I knew what the process was like. I mean, I had been going down to Springfield and talking to legislators and friends with legislators for a while before I went down there. But there's some things that even I was shocked at how bad it was. And I think people should know. I mean, people should know that their government is, that beholden to special interests and such. So if that's the least I can do for them, I'm doing something for them.
Why are you the best candidate in this race?
I think it's pretty clear that I'm the one that actually is going out there with big ideas. I didn't go to Springfield to rename a bunch of streets and get little tiny things passed. I want to do big reforms to save our state. And if I'm not there trying to save our state, who will?
Excellent. Is there anything that you didn't get the opportunity to talk about during this interview that you want to raise?
I think we talked about quite a bit. I think people should take a look at me on social media, make a judgment call themselves, and I hope to earn people's vote. I mean, this is something I'm passionate about, and frankly, I put a lot of time into this. And even my first 6 months or 7 months, I didn't get paid, and I didn't complain about that one bit. I'm excited about serving the people and really the common man, not the special interests.
Bail reform, any thoughts on that?
Bail reform? Yeah. So I'm actually pretty much in favor of most criminal justice reform issues. That differs me with State's Attorney Cleany. But there's no other Republican that votes with the Black Caucus as much as I do. And bail is supposed to guarantee you show up for court date, not punish you. So if you're got you don't have a good job, right? And you get arrested for something, and you can't post $500 or $1,000 bail. What happens? You're going to go to jail, and you're going to go to jail for 60 days, 90 days waiting for your court, right? You're going to lose your job. If you own a house, you're going to lose your house. And you're not even guilty yet. Now let's punish people who are guilty of crimes, but innocent until proven guilty here in the United States.